The sun of late spring was a gentle hand on the back of Silas Blackwood's neck. It warmed the worn collar of his flannel shirt, a patchwork of faded blues and soft frayed edges. At 78, his movements were a study in deliberation, each step measured, each gesture conserving a finite store of energy. He stood at the edge of the curb on Main Street, a ghost amid the vibrant, chattering life of the town's annual Memorial Day parade. Families had staked their claims with lawn chairs and blankets, their laughter a bright current in the air. Children, sticky with ice cream, waved miniature flags with unthinking fervor. Silas held no flag. In his gnarled hands, he turned a simple, worn garrison cap, the fabric so thin in places you could nearly see the light through it. It was the only piece of his old uniform he had left. He came every year, not for the marching bands or the gleaming fire trucks, but for the quiet echo of cadence he could still feel in the soles of his feet, a memory of a time when his legs were strong and his back was straight. He came for the faces of the young soldiers who marched, their eyes filled with a mixture of pride and the nervous energy of youth, the same look he remembered seeing in the mirror a lifetime ago. He came to honor the faces he could no longer see, the ones that lived only in the quiet acreage of his memory. A small boy, no older than 5, darted away from his mother and stumbled near the edge of the street. His little fist opened, and a tiny American flag on a plastic stick fell to the asphalt, directly in the path of the oncoming high school marching band. The boy's face crumpled, a prelude to tears. His mother, occupied with a younger sibling, didn't notice. The crowd saw it, but they were observers, insulated by their own comfort. A few people test. The flag lay there, a small, vibrant square of color against the gray, waiting to be trampled. Silas watched. His joints ached with a low, persistent hum, a complaint from the earth he had worked for 50 years. Bending down was a negotiation with gravity, a slow, careful descent. But he could not watch that flag be ground into the pavement. It was not a symbol of government or policy to him. It was a piece of cloth that had covered the caskets of friends. It was the promise he had seen in the eyes of men who never made it home to see their own children grow. With a soft groan that was lost in the festive noise, Silas stepped off the curb. He moved slowly, his worn work boots scuffing the ground. The world seemed to rush past him, the flashing lights, the expectant faces. A pair of teenagers leaning against a lamppost snickered. "Look at this guy," one muttered, his voice laced with the casual cruelty of youth. "He's gonna miss the whole show." "Probably lost," the other added, filming with his phone. "Poor old fella." Silas heard them. He had heard variations of those words for years. In the grocery store when he counted out his change too slowly. At the bank when he couldn't recall a password. He was a relic, a black and white photograph in a world of dazzling color. He ignored them. His focus narrowed to the small, vulnerable object on the ground. He reached it just as the drum major's whistle shrieked, signaling the band's forward march. With a pained effort, he bent at the knees, his back stiff as an old plank. His fingers, thick and callous from a life of farming and fixing, closed around the thin plastic stick. He straightened up, a process that took several long seconds, his breath catching in his chest. The flag was dusty. He held it carefully, and with the clean part of his sleeve, he wiped the dirt from the red and white stripes, his touch as gentle as if he were cleaning a wound. He turned and walked back toward the curb. The boy was crying now, his small body shaking. Silas knelt before him, a far more arduous task than bending over. He looked the boy in the eye. "A good soldier never leaves a flag behind," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He placed the clean flag back into the boy's hand. The child's tears stopped, his eyes wide with wonder. He clutched the flag to his chest. The boy's mother finally noticed, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Oh my goodness, thank you so much, sir. I'm so sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," Silas said, patting the boy's shoulder before beginning the slow, laborious process of getting to his feet again. He used the lamppost for support, his body trembling slightly with the strain. He settled back into his spot, placing the old garrison cap back on his head. The teenagers were still watching, smirking. The moment of kindness had done nothing to change their perception. To them, he was just an old man, causing a minor, pathetic scene. He was invisible, a remnant of a past no one cared to remember. He settled in to watch the parade, his heart a little heavier. the familiar ache of loneliness settling back into the hollows of his bones. His wife, Eleanor, had understood. She had been the keeper of his stories, the one who saw the young man still living inside the old farmer's frame. But she was gone 5 years now, and the stories were beginning to fade, even to him. The first wave of military presence was the local National Guard unit. Their uniforms crisp, their marching competent but lacking the razor's edge of a force long at war. Silas watched them with a quiet sense of approval. They were his neighbors, his countrymen. After them came the veterans group-saging men in VFW and American Legion caps, some marching, others riding in classic cars, their waves a bit slower, their eyes holding a distant light. Then, the air changed. A low, powerful rumble preceded them. The crowd's chatter grew hushed, replaced by a murmur of awe. This was the main event, the reason the parade route was so packed. A full battalion of active-duty infantry, home on a short leave before their next deployment, was marching. They were led by a command vehicle, a sleek, dark Humvee. Standing in the open hatch was a man who seemed carved from granite and steel. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with the quiet, fearsome decorations of a long and distinguished career. 2 stars gleamed on his collar. Major General Marcus Thorne. His face was weathered, stern, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. They swept over the crowd with a commander's practiced gaze. Silas watched the general, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. There was a severity in the man's posture, a weight in his presence that spoke of immense responsibility. He had known men like that, officers who carried the lives of their soldiers in every line on their faces. The column of troops followed, a river of camouflage and discipline. 1,000 soldiers, their boots striking the pavement in perfect, thunderous unison. The sound was not like the high school band's cheerful rhythm. It was a heartbeat, deep, powerful, and relentless. It shook the ground, vibrated in Silas's chest, and awakened memories he had long left to rest in the soil of his farm. The smell of diesel, the clatter of gear, the taste of dust and fear. As the command vehicle drew parallel to where Silas stood, General Thorne's sweeping gaze stopped. It locked onto the old man in the faded flannel shirt and the worn-out garrison cap. The general's expression, for a fraction of a second, broke its stony composure. His eyes widened, a flash of disbelief, then of dawning, absolute certainty. Silas, lost in the rhythm of the march, did not notice he was being watched. He was seeing other faces, other uniforms, on a landscape of mud and rain half a world away. "Stop the column." General Thorne's voice was not a shout, but it cut through the air with an authority that was absolute. The Humvee rolled to a halt. Behind it, a chain reaction of shouted commands brought the entire battalion of 1,000 soldiers to a dead stop. The sudden silence was deafening. The crowd, confused, began to whisper. Had something happened? Was there a threat? The general spoke to his driver, then descended from the vehicle with a fluid grace that defied his age. He walked directly toward the sidewalk, his polished boots gleaming. The crowd parted before him as if by an invisible force. His eyes never left Silas. The 2 teenagers who had been mocking the old man fell silent, their smirks vanishing, replaced by slack-jawed confusion. The mother of the little boy clutched her son's hand, her eyes wide. Everyone was watching. Silas finally looked up, blinking, as the tall, imposing figure of the general came to a stop directly in front of him. He was a foot shorter than the officer, and he felt a lifetime older. He looked at the 2 stars, then at the man's face. It was a face etched by sun and worry, but the eyes, there was something in the eyes. "Doc?" the general asked, his voice now quiet, almost raw with emotion. "Doc Blackwood?" The name echoed across a 50-year chasm. No one had called him that since he traded his medic's bag for a toolbox and a tractor key. He had been Specialist Blackwood. But to the boys he patched up in the blood-soaked mud of some forgotten hill, he was just Doc. Silas's mind raced, trying to place the face. So many faces. So many wounded boys with old eyes. He saw a flash of memory, a young lieutenant, barely 22, with a chest full of shrapnel and a grim determination to stay conscious. A boy he'd worked on for 2 hours under relentless fire, his hands the only thing between the lieutenant and death. A boy he thought he'd lost twice, but who had held on. Lieutenant Thorn? Silas whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. A slow smile spread across the general's face, a powerful release of tension. It's General Thorn now, Doc. Thanks to you. The crowd was utterly silent, straining to hear. The general took another step closer, his gaze softening as he looked at Silas's worn clothes, his gnarled hands, his tired posture. He saw not a frail old man, but the quiet, unshakable medic who had crawled through hell to save him and a dozen others. He saw the strength that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with courage. General Thorn turned his head slightly, raising his voice to address the silent troops standing at attention behind him. This man, he began, his voice ringing with a profound, unshakable reverence that filled the street, is Silas Blackwood. 51 years ago, in a place none of you have ever heard of, he was a combat medic. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't a decorated hero. He was just Doc, and he was the bravest man I have ever known. The general's eyes swept over the onlookers, the people in their lawn chairs, the teenagers against the lamppost. His gaze lingered on them for a moment, a silent rebuke for a judgment they didn't even realize they had made. When my platoon was hit, Thorn continued, his voice thick with memory, and most of us were down, he was the one who came for us. Through gunfire that would have sent anyone else to ground, he came. He carried one man on his back and dragged another, all while his own bag was shot to pieces. He used his own shirt to stop my bleeding. He never left a man behind. Not one. Silas looked down at his shoes, overwhelmed. He wasn't a hero. He was just doing his job. It was what any of them would have done. He felt a blush of heat on his neck, the unwanted weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes. General Thorn turned back to face him. He drew himself up to his full, formidable height. His back was ramrod straight. His chin was tucked. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to slice the air. It was a gesture of ultimate respect, a subordinate's deference to a man he held in the highest possible esteem, regardless of rank or time. Doc Blackwood, he said, his voice clear and strong. It is the honor of my life to see you again. Silas, flustered, instinctively brought his own trembling hand up to the brim of his old garrison cap in a clumsy, forgotten gesture of a salute. Then the general gave his next command. His voice was a low, powerful growl that carried down the entire block. Battalion eyes right. 1,000 heads snapped in unison to the right, their gazes locking onto the small, stooped figure of Silas Blackwood. The sound was like a single, sharp clap of thunder. It hit the crowd with physical force. Present, arms, in one single, fluid motion that rippled down the column like a wave, 1,000 right hands came up, 1,000 salutes were rendered. Not to the flag, not to the mayor standing on the review platform, but to the old farmer in the patched flannel shirt. The sound was nothing more than the whisper of 1,000 gloved hands touching the brims of their caps. But in the dead silence of Main Street, it was a roar. It was the sound of recognition. It was the sound of honor. It was the sound of a debt being paid across 5 decades. The teenagers against the lamppost stared, their phones forgotten. The one who had been filming slowly lowered his device, his face a mask of shame and awe. The mother hugged her small son, who looked from the saluting soldiers to the old man who had saved his flag, a connection forming in his young mind. The entire town, which had seen Silas for years as just a quiet, slow-moving piece of the background, was now seeing him for the first time. Silas stood there, his own hand still at his cap, as tears welled in his eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of release. A wall he didn't even know he had built inside himself had just been washed away. He was not forgotten. The boy he had been, the medic who had fought to keep his friends alive, was still there. He was seen. He met General Thorn's eyes, and in that gaze, 50 years collapsed into a single, shared moment of profound, unspoken understanding. The salute held for a full 30 seconds, a frozen tableau of honor given and honor received. Then, with another crisp command, the arms were dropped, The heads snapped forward, and the parade, on the general's order, marched on. But everything had changed. The cadence of the marching boots now seemed to beat in time with Silas's own heart. As the last soldier passed, the silence that returned was different. It was not empty. It was reverent. People turned to look at him, their expressions transformed. He was no longer an anonymous old man. He was Doc Blackwood. He was a piece of their history they hadn't known they possessed. A woman shyly approached and handed him a bottle of water. An old VFW member came over, shook his hand firmly, and simply nodded, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, Doc," he said before walking away. The teenagers from the lamppost walked over, their heads bowed. The one with the phone looked up, his face red with shame. "Sir," he stammered. We're sorry." Silas looked at their young faces, and he saw no malice. He saw only the carelessness of not knowing. "There's nothing to be sorry for," he said, his voice gentle. "You just go on and live a life that's worth the trouble. That's all any of us can do." They nodded, the lesson landing with a weight no teacher could have ever imparted. They backed away, leaving him in a small circle of quiet respect. The parade was over, but for Silas, something had just begun. The profound loneliness that had been his constant companion since Eleanor's passing felt distant. He was still alone, but he was no longer invisible. Later that afternoon, a dark, official-looking car rolled up the long, dusty lane to Silas's farmhouse. The house was modest, its paint peeling, but the porch was swept clean and the fields beyond were neatly tended. General Thorne got out, this time in a simple polo shirt and slacks, the stars and formality left behind. Silas met him on the porch, offering him a glass of lemonade. They sat on the old swing, its chains groaning a familiar song. They didn't talk about the war. They talked about the weather, about the price of corn, about Eleanor's prize-winning roses that Silas still struggled to keep alive. "She was a good woman," Silas said, looking out at the flower beds. "She knew how to make things grow." "You did too, Doc," Thorne said quietly. "You just had a different kind of garden." Before he left, the general reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, bronze coin. He pressed it into Silas's palm. It was his personal challenge coin, bearing his rank and his unit's insignia. "The ones they give you for a ceremony are for show," Thorne said. "This one's for the guys who earned it in the dirt. There aren't many of them." Silas closed his hand around the coin, its weight solid and real. "I was just doing my job, Marcus." "That's what you said then, too," Thorne replied with a small smile. "Doing your job is one thing. Doing it with that much heart is another. You taught me that service isn't about the orders you follow. It's about the person you're standing next to. I've tried to lead like that my whole career, because of you." They shook hands, a long, firm grip that bridged the years. As Thorne's car disappeared down the lane, Silas stood on his porch, the warm metal of the coin a comforting presence in his hand. He didn't go back into the house. Instead, he walked out into his fields, the place where he felt most at home. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting a golden light over the new green shoots of corn that pushed up from the dark, rich earth. He knelt down, just as he had on the parade route, but this time with no pain. He ran his hand over the soil, feeling the cool, life-giving grit. He had spent a lifetime saving things. Saving men in a war-torn jungle, saving a little boy's flag on a small-town street, saving this small piece of land from weeds and drought. He had never asked for thanks, never expected recognition. He had simply done the work that was in front of him. He looked up at the vast, open sky, the first stars beginning to prick the deepening blue. The noise of the parade was gone, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the young corn. He felt Eleanor's presence beside him, not as a painful absence, but as a quiet, steady warmth, like the last light of the day. The coin was in his pocket, a secret anchor to his past, but his eyes were on the field. The harvest was still a long way off, but the seeds were planted. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the unmistakable promise of growth.